at the height of the troll storms against you, I was recently rewatching a clip from 1,000 Cuts, and you said, I'm getting 90 hate messages per hour, and those included death threats and vile, horrible things said about you. How do you fight? What did you present to Leni, and how do you fight that what you're seeing in black and white in the data?
Oh my God, you stumble through it. The first is emotionally, you gear up, right? We used to say in rap where you develop a thick skin, but that's not even enough. I think when I showed Leni the data, I was just, you cannot not respond. And yet, your response will not get as much distribution as the original attack, right? This we know for sure. So you're handcuffed from the beginning if you don't use fear, anger, or hate. So if you're the target of attack, what did we do? I focused on the data. I focused on the data, and I focused on doing our jobs and telling as many people as we can about what was happening. I mean, I was the one who went to Ramona. Ramona was talking about the drug war at the beginning, right? Because that was what people focused on, but I was like, this is more insidious. This is happening behind the scenes. The data is clear, and it is happening all around the world. So I was already concerned at that point that what was starting in 2016 would go all the way until our next presidential elections, which it did, right? The top three, at that point, we could already see who were the people. They were women who were being attacked online, and we quantified this. This was a report. This is funny, actually not. We quantified it in a report. Jigsaw, Google's think tank, right, had pulled together a dozen research groups all around the world, and the three case studies, the ones most attacked from the Philippines, was Leni Robredo at number one, Lila de Lima, who was a senator who had been jailed. She just got out on bail, but she had been in prison for nearly 7 years under the Duterte administration. She was number two because it was a combination of sexist attacks against her, far more than what we received, sexism, because she admitted she had an affair with her driver, and that was in like a huge attack in Congress. Imagine congressmen asking about the sex life. This was what was normalized. And then I was third at 90 hate messages per hour. I was third. But here's the thing, when we brought this into this report, Jigsaw decided not to run it. Not to run the entire report with over a dozen different research groups looking about, she's nervous. I knew she would do that. And if we had run that global report, because that was the first time misogyny and women, targeting women, was really put together. That was in 2017. If we had run it then, more importantly, if Jigsaw released it then, I think we would be far better prepared. How do you fight back? You tell us, you get people, you move out of the online world into the real world. You create a shared reality where you decide, this is what is happening. What are we gonna do about it?
Ramona, I dropped the mic. Ramona, tell me, your film was characterized as filmmaking as political disruption. I don't know if you set out for that, but I know, it's a little bit startling. And Leni pointed to the idea that you had 800 reels of film or whatever it was you were shooting on. How do you frame the story? How intentional are you about what you're trying to communicate and with the material that you have, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm drawn, as a documentary filmmaker, I'm drawn to behavior. That's what I do. I always say, as a documentary filmmaker, I am an observer of behavior. It fascinates me. And I always enter into people's lives at transitional moments in their lives, right? The vice president running for president, when she ran for president. Maria getting attacked. And it shows you behavior. It shows, in the worst of times, how do people behave? And to me, that makes a fascinating documentary and story, and also very telling. And then the backdrop, of course, is history, because they're at the forefront, right? And however they behave, and the backdrop, they all sort of in conversation with each other. And so, how does it get made? In the editing room, right? I mean, I know what I have in the field. I know when I'm done. After 800 hours of footage, not necessarily, but I know when I'm done. And I usually have containers to my film, like the election campaign, that's a container to the film. Once it's done, it's done. And then I go back into the editing room, and then it's remade again. So what I think I have is remade again when we start watching the footage.
It's fascinating. Leni, why did you say yes when Ramona called you, knocked on your door, and what was it like? I know you haven't seen the film yet, but what was it like? What were the moments that she captured, you think, that went from yes to wow, look at how much she documented?
I think Ramona knows this. When she first asked if she could be allowed to stalk us every day, every hour, my small team was hesitant. Because we talk a lot about backroom plans, and they felt like it would be very intrusive if Ramona's team will be there. But there are two things which I was the one who convinced the team to say yes. Number one, Ramona comes from the same home city as I do.
Nice.
So I know her family. I didn't know her enough, but I know her family, and I remember I was telling my team, I feel it in my gut that she can be trusted. That was number one. And number two, because of 1,000 cuts. I saw 1,000 cuts, and that sort of was the CV of Ramona as a filmmaker.
And Ramona, your art speaks for itself. You've won a Peabody, a Gotham, an Emmys, Independent Spirit Awards. You've been a Guggenheim Fellow, a U.S. literally a member of the Motion Picture Academy. As celebrated a filmmaker as there is out there. How does this film encapsulate the joy that you talked about in your first answer? And why is that important to you?
When you see the film, and you will all see the film tomorrow, right? At
My ticket,
6:30 at the Ray. You're all gonna be there, right?
Yes.
So after you see the film, you'll see what I mean by leaning into joy. But because what I found on the ground during the campaign was this spontaneous collection of people rallying around the vice president to be president. So to explain again, and I had to explain this in the film because I forget that in this country you vote tickets in, right? You vote one ticket. You vote either Dem or Republican, whatever. In the Philippines, you vote the vice president, the president in opposite and separately. So they can be in opposing opposing parties as president or vice president, right? So they don't feel, it's for checks and balances. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. What was I got? Oh, the joy. This is what I found. I found all this, the diversity of people who were rallying around this campaign spontaneously. They felt the need to really go out there and give it their all. And that to me was stunning.
There's a scene that's out in the public now about a flash mob, and there's dancing and choreography, and tell me about that.
So in the Philippines, elections are spectacle, and I'm also very drawn to the spectacle of elections. It's nowhere else in this world will you see elections the way we hold elections in the Philippines. It's song and dance, but it's very serious too. You're voting for the next leader of the country for 6 years. It's 1 6-year term, and then you're done. That is a plan. Always, unless you want to change something, but 6 years. So
Election is spectacle.
election,
Flash mob.
the flash mob. So what you see in the scene is there were flash mobs all over the Capitol. Really veteran theater actors and really known actors just going to all parts of the Capitol. And they would perform these flash mobs. Because then they knew it went to Maria saying, sometimes you really can't fight this information. right? The truth. So it was really house to house. It was a house to house, like shaking hands and saying, who are you voting for? Are you thinking of voting for Leni Robredo? Because that is still the most effective.
Yeah.
So they would start a flash mob, and then they would go into the inner sanctums of all the really very poor areas of the city, and they would say, who are you voting for? Think of voting for Leni Robredo. Why are you, so it was amazing.
It is
amazing.
joyful. The choreography is excellent. Back to the grimness of it, though, Maria.
My role.
You talk.
I just said.
You talk. It's yin and yang. You talk about the idea that why should people care in the United States about what happens in an election in the Philippines, and that in many ways what happens in the Philippines is a canary in the coal mine when it comes to sort of democracy and forces. You're about to start teaching this fall at Columbia University in my neighborhood about this idea of disinformation and its root causes. Because what you're saying is what we're seeing on the ground is the effect, but the cause in many ways points at big tech.
Big time for big tech. Here, Ramona, so you don't have to hold to get it. You can hold. Upstream, right? So what are we doing? Without a shared space, we have nothing. Without facts, without truth, without trust, how can you have integrity of elections? So as early as 1,000 cuts, I was already saying the tipping point is going to be 2024. Disinformation, and I'm going to go to Yuri Andropov, former KGB chairman. He said that disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay, but if you take it all the time, you become a changed person. We have been taking it for a very long time, and the tipping point politically, so the information operations, information warfare began in 2014, the same time as Ukraine, right? Russia against Ukraine. Marcos began information operations to change history, Milan Kundera's quote. Remember, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. He began changing history in 2014. Tipping point politically, 2016, Duterte is elected. That was the tipping point politically, globally. Trump gets elected, the Catalan elections, you have in France in 2017, Facebook moved against the disinformation in France because France is a large market, but our countries, global south, nothing really was done. So what happens if you don't stop the disinformation the way it rolls out on tech? 2018 MIT study said lies spread at least 6 times faster than facts. You lace it with anger and hate, it spreads even more, right? That's why we're torn apart. If you don't stop there, then it's like all of us got, I used to say virus before COVID. But this is where we are today. So how do we fight back against it? Understand it's global. Understand that it has already had an impact on democracies. And that as for Sweden's VDEM said that as of last year, 72% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. This year will be the tipping point for whether we can survive it. We, as in your values, your identity, and think about it like this. Our identities are being weaponized against us. Women, Gender Disinformation Report, UNESCO report in 2022 just showed the very first rollback of a democracy is the attack against women. Who were the people at the forefront? The women. Name a country, the women. So, I'm sorry, I took too long, but this is it.
This is the moment.
This is the moment.
Yeah.
And I'm worried, I'm so worried.
No, well, and Leni, let's talk about the work that you're grounding still in the real world, because after leaving the vice president's office, and as you know, she lost her bid for president. Sorry, didn't mean to give Maria anything away. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, but wait, she lost by only 200,000. She won by only 200,000 votes as
the
vice
vice
president.
president.
Yeah,
As vice
yeah.
president.
She lost.
But during your tenure, you, as part of the Liberal Party, did a lot for anti-poverty campaigns. One of this was Angat Buhay.
Buhay.
This is when you need Jose Antonio Vargas, who has COVID is sidelined. But it means uplifting lives, and you have extended those policies into the real world, and you're continuing to act on it now. So bring us up to date. What are you busy doing now?
I'm chairman and president of Angat Buhay now, and Angat Buhay is now a non-profit. But we started Angat Buhay when I was vice president. We started it as soon as I started my term as vice president. And the reason why we started an anti-poverty program was that I didn't want to waste 6 years doing ceremonial work. And it looks like I would be sidelined the entire 6 years and I would be vice president. So we thought of doing Angat Buhay, but you know, it was ironic in the sense that Angat Buhay was a program under the office of the vice president, but we were operating as a non-government organization already, in the sense that government would not give us funds for our programs, so we sort of depended on private sector support. So after I finished my term in 2022, we felt it would be a great disservice to put a stop to Angat Buhay, in the sense that all our partners are private sector organizations anyway. So we decided to move it into a non-profit organization. So we're doing Angat Buhay now. We're doing a lot of programs on public education, public health, women empowerment, rural development, disaster preparedness, so many things, many other things, which is actually just an extension of what we were doing already before. Why did we choose to start an anti-poverty thing when I was vice president? Because that was my orientation even before I joined government. I was a human rights lawyer for a very long time, and I have been working in the margins and in many communities all over the country. So it felt like it was the most logical thing to do when I was vice president.
We have about 9 minutes left, and I want to do something a little asynchronous. I'm going to ask questions from the audience. So just raise your hand if you have a question. I'm going to take 3, and then I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to answer the 3 questions because we have such limited time. I see 1 hand. I want 2 more, and then we'll hear all 3 questions. Yes. And tell us who you are.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nima Holt. I'm based out of Washington, D.C. I'm actually not a filmmaker. I work at a nonprofit called the Natural Resources Defense Council, so I work in the climate space. But I'm here to support my brother who has a film out in Sundance. Anyway, because we are in Sundance and we are talking about creatives and shaping narratives and changing narratives, it has been sort of the MO of dictatorships, especially in the Philippines, to use the arts or support the arts to further a lot of propaganda and misinformation. And when you're here in sort of this space where a lot of Filipino and Filipino-American creatives don't really know the nuances of that history, what is your advice for these Filipino creatives in this space to be a little more cautious and alert about, you know, fundraising for their films? And we've seen some news about expanding some of the Philippine Film Development Corporation funding. So just to, you know,
That is
advice.
such an excellent question. Thank you. I'm so glad we opened up to the audience. I saw another hand over here. Yes.
Hi, Martin, Catherine, everyone. My name is Bianca. I'm living in Los Angeles right now, but I grew up in the Philippines. My family's from Naga. It's so inspiring to see all of you all together. You know, I'm really emotional seeing all of you together. And I think what I'm going to ask is, like, even the North Star for a lot of us women, like, pushing forward and, like, trying to make a change. But hindi po ba kayo napapagod? Like, don't you get tired? And what do you do when you're in those moments of, like, exhaustion?
Oh, good question. Okay, third one at the back. And then we'll unleash it onto you guys. Okay, we have like 8 minutes left. Okay.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Jackie Chang. I'm a retired U.S. Air Force turned screenwriter, and I love this intersectionality of international relations and storytelling. And I'm interested to hear your perspective about the U.S.-Philippine relations and where you see the future going and what stories that you see emerging that can help educate Americans about the history of U.S. relations with the Philippines.
Wow, you guys just elevated the level of questions. Nice. Okay, so who wants to take any of those? those. Who wants to do arts and propaganda? And advice?
I can summarize.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, arts and propaganda. Do you know Raul Sunico? He's my uncle, and he went to Juilliard because of Imelda Marcos, right? He was funded. I've learned a lot in dealing with this because in my family, the split is actually interesting from 1986. I would say be very aware of what it is, but get the money you need to do for your art and transform it. Because it's a battle. That's the first. And even under Duterte, under Marcos, under Duterte, we saw our State of the Nation address being, quote, directed in ways that are very strange. But I shouldn't comment. Anyway, run in, jump in. Bianca, don't you get tired? I have 4 co-founders, and we had this. It's tired and fear, and we actually have a pact with each other in Rappler. You pass. Only one of us can be afraid at a time, so you have a turn. And only one can be tired at a time, right? And actually you get rejuvenated by the youth, right? And then the last one, U.S.-Philippine relations. I gotta say, history is in the eyes of the beholder. In my book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, I go back. I grew up at a time when there was no Filipino fight for independence. We were an appendage to the Spanish-American War and given to the United States in that time period. This generation of Gen Zs are far more attuned to narratives of decolonization. But here, I'll end with this. The old colonial masters of the past are no longer nation. They've moved online. And we now have new colonial masters. And let me end with this. Be very aware of the coded bias that is in your cell phone, in the platforms you use. And you'll see many films about this now, right? Because we're living in science fiction times. And I think as a creative, right, you must capture our imagination of the moment. And then the last part is, if you ever get to a point where you build tech, we need to build tech. And I'll end with this. If you haven't downloaded the Rappler app, we just rolled out. I've lost faith in big tech. We rolled out a chat app on top of Rappler on the Matrix protocol. You guys gotta check out Matrix protocol. It's desegregated, it is safe. How do we find a safe place to actually be vulnerable, to actually have discussions? That's what we're trying to do.
Leni, you don't have to answer all 3, but I definitely want you to answer the U.S.-Philippine question and how you deal with your fatigue.
No, I'll answer also the arts and culture thing.
Sure.
Because it's a new pillar of Angat Buhay. And the reason why we added arts and culture now as a pillar, it wasn't a pillar yet before when I was VP, was that Ramona was telling us about the many volunteer artists, theater people during the campaign, and they still want to volunteer now. So they're volunteering in many of our community programs, but that is an aside. The main thing is that some of them, especially some of the national artists, are getting invited to Malacanang now for shows and are being offered help, and they would ask, should we go, should we get it, should we accept the invitation? And I always tell them exactly like Maria framed it, go, as long as you use the help to transform. Because I think it's very important. With the U.S.-Philippine relations, this is a completely different one from Maria's. And this is more, this is more petty in a sense. But I get to talk to a lot of ambassadors now compared to when I was VP before. Because when I was VP, and I would get ambassadors during courtesy calls, they were so concerned about the country's foreign relations, foreign policy, the country's relationship with not just the US, but many other, especially the EU countries. And that fear, the fear before is not so much, the fear now is not so much as it was before. Meaning to say, for many, the U.S. Philippines relations and perhaps Philippine EU relations is better now, in the sense that it's the president now is not the same as President Duterte before. President Duterte was very, very vocal about his disdain of the U.S. and of many Western countries. President Marcos is not like that. In fact, I think he has been, exerting effort to repair whatever damage in the relations that we had before. With Bianca's question, I think it helped that I spent a lot of time doing human rights work when I was still a lawyer. When I was still lawyering before, I was so used to very difficult circumstances that when I became a politician already, and especially when I became vice president, and it became so difficult for me, I go back to where I was before, and just think of the many people we have been helping, that I was in a better place compared to them, and I didn't have, I didn't have any reason to complain. So it helped also as far as my staff were concerned. Maria and Ramona knows that I work with very, very young people, and when the attack started coming, they were very frustrated of that fact that we're doing a lot, trying to be of service to our constituents, but why the attacks? And I just tell them, you just focus on the work that's ahead of us. They immerse a lot in communities, and it sort of takes them away from all the all the evil that was happening around us. So in a way, it was good for our mental health, but it was also bad in the sense that we weren't able to deal with the disinformation in the manner that we should have.
Ramona, bring us home.
It's exhausting work. It is. And also because a lot of us work alone, right? And we work in silos. And I think what will give you energy to keep going is community. In places like Sundance, film festivals, the other like your
Sunrise Collective.
Sunrise Collective. No, it's true. Because I work, usually I'm alone, I'm thinking of these films, and then I come out of my little, hutch, and all these people really, wow, you want to see my film? You're interested in what I have to say, which is so, then that gives you energy. But community gives you energy. It has to be, because you're like-minded people, so reach out, that's my one.
I love it. I'm so grateful to all three of you for your life's work, for being here, for your film, for all of that standing ovation. My thanks to Create, the Golden House, for Thank you so much for building this community.